And we want to talk about the legal implications there. What's next for SBF? For that, we want to bring in former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. Renato is a partner at Bryan, Leighton, and Paisner. Renato, great to have you here. Alexis, just laying out the charges that SBF is facing right now. 3 separate court filings, the DOJ, the SEC, the CFTC. Just first, your reaction to the number of charges that SBF is facing today.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I have to say the number of charges and the speed surprises me a little bit. And here's what I mean. When I was a federal prosecutor, I worked on a lot of parallel investigations with the SEC and CFTC. In fact, with some of the people who worked on this particular case, and those cases took years to bring to conclusion, to bring to charges. Sometimes they didn't even get there at all at the end. And then, I will say that, the not only is the speed astounding, this took weeks and not months or years, but the sheer scope of the charges, right? You just read them a moment ago. What this suggests to me is that the Justice Department is very confident in their case. I mean, one reason why they might charge, more broad charges is they want to make sure that they're able to extradite him and keep him here once they have done that. But at the end of the day, prosecutors are not going to charge cases that charge crimes that they think that they ultimately can't prove in the end, that they're going to dismiss. And this suggests a lot of confidence, despite an indictment that doesn't have a lot of specifics in it. And so that's really telling.
Renato, good to see you. So the speed of these charges implies what? And the confidence in those charges, does that lead you to believe that someone may have flipped?
Great question. So first of all, the speed tells me that 2 things. One, they thought that they had the goods on him. In other words, most of the time when you have a complex fraud case like this one, I would spend months reviewing communications, trying to find the smoking gun email or text message or IM, that sort of thing. There'd be a lot, sometimes the Justice Department would go after the SEC or CFTC, wade in the weeds while they're conducting their investigation. None of that here. They went right. It's like a monopoly where you go directly to jail. You don't pass go, that sort of thing. They just went right to the end here. Everything is thrown at Mr. Bankman-Fried at once. It tells me that they have a lot of confidence. And I think that is not necessarily due to a flipper. I think that is in part due to his own statements. I mean, here's a gentleman who, knowing he's under a criminal investigation, instead of hiring somebody like me, lawyering up, remaining silent, he goes, talks to everybody possible, not just journalists, but he's on Twitter Spaces, talking to, potential victims, everyone possible, putting himself out there, making statements that can be used against him. I think that's part of the problem. And I think another issue here is just the sheer brazenness of what he did. As set forth in the indictment, it looks like from the very beginning, money was just completely mismanaged and used as his own personal piggy bank. A very obvious problem that'll be hard for him to explain away.
Yeah, money clearly mismanaged. Also, the lack of records. John J. Ray, he's the new CEO of FTX. He's testifying down on Capitol Hill today. He was asked about the records. He was asked about what he has found so far over the last few weeks at FTX. I want to play a quick soundbite and then get your reaction to that.
We're dealing with literally a sort of a paperless bankruptcy in terms of how they created this company. It makes it very difficult to trace and track assets, and particularly, as I've said, in the crypto world. It's really unprecedented in terms of the lack of documentation.
Renato, to what extent does this complicate the case against SBF if we don't have those records?
It's a smart question because in many cases that would actually help the defense, right? Okay, we have nothing written down, then you could just make it up as you go along. I think the issue here is in a different kind of case, this could really work to Mr. Bankman-Fried's advantage. Like, for example, if this was a narrow case about a specific portion of the business that was not being managed properly, or where there was a false statement that was a fairly minor part of the business. I think the problem here is that the allegations in the indictment are that all FTX customers were defrauded because they were told up front that their funds were going to remain available for their use and withdrawal at FTX, and they weren't. They were sent all over the place, including billions of dollars to Mr. Bankman-Fried. So, that alone, plus obviously all the other frauds here, it's just hard to explain away as, well, I wasn't paying attention or I wasn't attentive to that. I think, the fact that there might be a lack of communications that are kept. I know Mr. Ray mentioned elsewhere that they use disappearing chats. I think that would ordinarily be an issue for prosecutors as well if it wasn't for the fact that Mr. Bankman-Fried put himself out there so often, making a lot of public statements. I think he sped this along unwittingly, perhaps, but he got us to where we're at today.
Certainly enhances their desire to get someone to flip that paperless bankruptcy. As per what's next, there is an extradition treaty between the Bahamas and the United States. When do you expect he'll be brought home? And just your ballpark, what do you think we're looking at in terms of a potential jail sentence for Sam Bankman-Fried?
Yeah, a couple of big questions there. First of all, I don't think the Justice Department would have charged him unless they were confident that they would be able to extradite him. So I suspect they've already had conversations with the Bahamian government, and the Bahamian government has already indicated publicly that they're going to be cooperative. So I think that'll happen in a matter of maybe weeks, if not days, certainly weeks. He'll be here in the United States. But, like everyone else accused of a crime, Mr. Bankman-Fried's going to have rights, and that's going to include the ability to receive the discovery in advance of the evidence against him. He'll have an opportunity with his attorneys to review that and make motions and so forth. I don't expect a trial of Mr. Bankman-Fried until late 2023, more likely in 2024. And in terms of a sentence, I really think he's looking at decades in prison. I mean, a very substantial sentence. We look at the sentence, for example, that the founder of Theranos recently received. She's pregnant. And it has a much smaller dollar figure in her fraud than Mr. Frank Bankman-Fried has. And she got 14 years. I would expect him to pay a much more substantial price than that if he's ultimately convicted.
Wow. All right. Renato Mariotti, always great to get your perspective. Thanks so much.